Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Legal Compliance for Posting, Marketing, and Selling. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that is building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. Awesome. Iran, Texas, Ohio, Georgia, Tennessee, California, Iowa, San Fran, North Carolina. Welcome from all over, everyone. Thank you for dialing in. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls to step back and see how everyone is doing today. So this first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? I'll give everyone a couple moments to think about it and submit a response. Thank you for participating. Give it another couple moments. LA, Washington, awesome. Welcome, everyone. All right, I'm going to end this poll, share these results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, surviving close behind, and some feelings of anxiety. Hopefully, some of our conversation will help and address some of those feelings. I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? Give everyone a few moments to submit a response here as well. And this one just helps us make sure that we are continuing to provide relevant content to our community here. Awesome. Give it another couple moments. Thank you for participating. I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Ooh, finance in the lead, surviving close behind. We got some sales, marketing, scale, and team in there as well. Thank you for participating, and we will take this into account. I am going to stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Marie Smith, Chief Information Officer and co-founder at Data 360. Marie, thank you so much for being here with us once again. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Anna, thanks for hosting me. And thanks everybody for joining. So today we're actually going to talk about legal compliance for posting, marketing, selling online. And the biggest thing I want to start this off with is just to let you know, this is not about being a lawyer. This is about being an owner who is legally competent and legally literate, right, to guide your legal counsel and guide your organization in a way that is lawful, right? And I say that because a lot of people think, well, don't I just wait and hit an emergency and then my lawyer tells me what to do? No, that would be a terrible way of handling it. So today, what we're going to talk about is how to be proactive and how to know how to put everything together in a way that makes the most sense. So with this, we're going to start with a couple concepts, right? And so the first concept is data security, right? And we start with this because most of the laws that are on the books in every state, in every country, is really about security, right? And what that means is data security, right, is critical to both the public and private sector for the legal and moral obligation. Again, legal and moral, right? So the law considers this a very serious obligation, right, to protect users and a reputational risk of a data breach, right? And why is a data breach important? Because that's where people steal other people's information, right, and do bad things with it and cause havoc and chaos, right? So data security ultimately is just about preventing chaos, right? So everything you do online, you want to think about managing the risk of chaos happening in your organization, why things can go the way they go, right? And one word I'm going to say about this also, or one sort of concept I'm going to propagate throughout this presentation is making sure you understand that even if you're on, for example, Facebook, MailChimp, Wix, Squarespace, all those, right? If you venture to read the legal terms of service, and I know we all don't, but we should, and you'll notice that basically you're waiving your rights to sue them in case of any data security issue, in case of any breach, in case of anything, right? And you can still sue them, but it's really, really hard. And so what happens is if something happens to your users on that platform, or something happens to your users on your website, your users can sue you, right? And so in the state of California in particular, and a couple other territories, personal lawsuits can now be filed for breaches of laws and data security and privacy and all that stuff. It's no longer a government fine issue. It is actually a personal issue. So keep that in mind when we're talking about these concepts. Data security is not just a business thing, an insurance thing. Oh, I'll have my lawyer handle it later. It's also a personal thing because you could get personally sued. So what are data security technologies you can put into place, right? So when you're a small business, a lot of different of your like office tools will cover this. So for example, if you're with like a GoDaddy, you're not going to get you're not going to get data security. And please leave GoDaddy if you are on GoDaddy. Please get on Microsoft or Google or one of the ones, because they do have data security built in, right? So there are auditing tools built in. There are real-time alerts built in, and I'll show you some of those. There are data risk assessment, data minimization, and there's ways to purge stale data. So Google and Microsoft have this built into their office suites already. So you don't really have to think about how to manage that separately like you would with a GoDaddy or Wix or Squarespace or any of those. The capabilities you need to look for, or you need to know where your data's at, right? Where's it stored? And you think, of course, it's on my computer or it's on the cloud, right? But if you're using other services, sometimes the data gets copied and put into other places where you don't necessarily know they are, and that's where you can get in trouble. So again, if you're with a mainstream service like a Google or a Microsoft, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're doing some other thing, Namecheap or some other thing, you're putting data, you're putting information in there, you're storing stuff in it. We don't know where that is, right? They might be copying and putting into some solution that goes into some other cloud solution, and then your data is copied and it's all over the place and you don't know it. So you want to know where your data lives. You want to track user access. So you want to be able to control who can go in and out, right? You can do that with those kinds of accounts that I just talked about. And you want to block high risk activities. High risk activities include copying data, being able to easily share passwords, that kind of stuff. There are two main laws that started this whole new revolution, right? So why is nobody talking to you about this usually? Is because for small businesses, this didn't really start to come into effect until 2020, right? Very short 3 years ago. So, and then after that, we had the pandemic. So of course, it did not hit the news. So these laws all came into effect. Some of them just recently came into effect as late as January. So you want to know if you're doing business, for example, in Europe, that there's some things that you need to take into account. And these are pretty much universal, right? These kind of set the standard. And if you're in California, or if your website hits California, so everybody's website hits California, so this applies to you, right? You have to take certain things into account. So these are the kind of core concepts. The GDPR in Europe and the CCPA law in California pretty much form these concepts. So scope. The scope is personal data, right? Also known as personally identifiable information, or PII, which is email, name, location, anything that can help you identify that person's private life, including their business information, right? And including actually your operation with them on social media. You get exposed to their personal information. If you're collecting that for any reason, or you're saving lists, or you're making groups, or any of that stuff, this is where this starts to apply to you. The concepts, right to access, right? So people have the right to access the information you've collected on them. Right to portability. People have the right to be able to ask for the information to be exported out of your system or imported into your system in a certain way. Right to correction, right? So this is not included in California's law. In this California law, there's a second one we'll talk about. They have the right to correct their information, right? So if you're on Shopify, you're selling anything online, you're on Etsy, all that stuff, you still have to pay attention to this stuff, right? So right to correction, make sure people can correct their information. Right to stop processing, right? So right to say, I don't want to have this happen anymore. I don't want to do a business with you anymore. Right to stop automated decision making. In Europe, there's a right to require a human to make decisions that have a legal effect, right? So you could say, I don't want any information to process my orders anymore. And you have to comply with that. So there's some things that Europeans can request, right? Not including the CCPA. Right to stop third-party transfer. So you can't share data with third parties. You can't sell data to third parties in California or America. Doesn't mean, and selling is actually an interesting word too, because if you're, for example, you have a partner program or an affiliate program or that sort of stuff, that could be considered selling. So this is one of those things where you do want to talk to an attorney and say, am I selling data or not? If you're managing affiliate programs, partner programs, that sort of stuff, be very, very careful. Right to erasure. So the right to erase data out of your system, right? Which is not the same as just unsubscribing. If they say, I want my data deleted, I want it erased out of your system, you have to completely erase it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't create an audit trail of that person. So you can say, you can change their information to numbers or to something that will equivocate that was this person, but you cannot keep their data in your system. The right to equal services and price. So you want to obviously make sure that everybody has the same access to pricing and services. It doesn't change based on any specific personal characteristics. The right to private right of action of damages. So the EU, there's actually no floor, no ceiling. The EU can just decide how much they want to fine you. There is no limit. And there's no bottom, there's no top. So that's not good. So this is how serious they're taking these actions, right? And the right of floor, the floor for California is $100 and the ceiling is $750 per consumer per data breach incident. So if you have a bad incident and something happens to 10,000 people, that's 10,000 times $100. And if it's something horrible, it's 10,000 times $750, right? So it's pretty crazy, right? And then the regular enforcement penalties is 4% of global sales, I believe. And I see my thing is covering this up. And then there's different penalties. Let me pull it. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Let's move my little thingy out the way. Okay, so California is up to $2,500 per unintentional violation, and $7,500 per intentional violation. Europe is 4% of global revenues. So both of those are pretty steep fines, right? So this is a real serious issue in terms of how much you can get charged for violations. It doesn't matter whether you're small, they don't care. In other territories, there are special laws. So there's the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or I would say PIPEDA. Don't know if that's how they say it, but in Canada, there are special laws that you need to take into account too. And this is not about, again, this is not about where you live, this is where you do business. So if your website touches Canada and you have Canadians buying things from you, you need to be aware of PIPEDA. So similar, where disclosure of personal information is all across Canada except for Alberta, British Columbia, and I don't know what PQ is. Anybody know in the chat, feel free to share. They each have substantially similar legislation. So the purpose is to establish the rules, again, that govern collection, use, and disclosure of personal information, that recognizes the right of the privacy of the individuals and the need of organizations to collect, use, disclose personal information. So you want to make sure that, again, similar thing, you want to have best practices. So you want to have accountability, identify purposes of using the information, consent, limiting the collection, the use, disclosure, retention, accuracy. You want to have safeguards, meaning how do you back up things? How do you guard things? So you have security, openness, individual access, and you want to challenge compliance, meaning you want to be able to test and make sure that all the things you put into place work. You want to be able to show that there's reports there. So again, if you're super tiny and you're dealing with just you and a couple people, it's just a matter of getting on Google and Microsoft because they handle all of this compliance, right? There are other things you need to think about as well. Online meetings. So here's the interesting thing about using Zoom. Zoom does not have a compliance check when it comes to data protection. Only Google and Microsoft do. They don't, and you waive your rights, right? So there's no automated thing happening in the background that's making sure you're compliant. So just keep that in mind. If you're small using Zoom, if you're doing business all over the world or you're doing different things, Zoom is not actually protecting you, even though we know it's a great system. We're on it now. It is an independent organization that does not have the same data security checks as a Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, etc. In-person meetings, you just want to be careful about what you're collecting. You want to have records of what you are not doing. I know a lot of times we just have meetings and we just think nothing about them later. Not keeping those, not being clear about what information is being shared, not keeping track of things, probably not a great idea. Taking care of how outside entities attempt to access raw information, right? Other entities wishing to obtain information, what is your policy, right? How do you get it checked? How do you know whether it's a proper request or not, right? And where do you store user data and personal information? Where you store it, again, big deal. And making sure things are backed up, right? Do you have a backup system? Do you have a virus system? Do you have something for hackers? Do you have something for your browser, right? Just basic protections, right? That's what's going to keep you from being into hot water. Making sure you have just the basics in place and you don't just let it stay open and wait to be busted, right? That's when you're going to get in trouble. So this just talks about like some of the different procedures they go through, right? They do intake, they do investigation, they have further enforcement tools. So, don't get into this mess. This is a big mess. right? In Canada, it's a big mess. In California, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about the other places. So speaking of other places, here's some other things that have happened. So we talked about GDPR and CCPA, right? So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. CCPA stands for the California Consumer Privacy Act. And then this year, January 2023, we started now having the California Privacy Rights Act, and Virginia has their law now called the Consumer Data Protection Act, and Colorado now has their law called the Colorado Privacy Act, right? And they all have these wonderful acronyms: GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, VCDPA, CPA, right? So these are kind of the nicknames of these laws. And each one has, and we'll share this so you can take a look at the chart, different codes, right? Different jurisdictions. There are different models. So for example, with Europe, you have to have people opt in, means you have to have a record of where they opted in to your system. With CCPA, CPRA, VCPA, VCDPA, and CPA, they're opt-out systems, which means you can have people's information however you have it, and they have to opt out. They have to say, get me out of here. The second, there's not a sector basis, right? The effective dates. And actually, it's a GDPR started in 2018. But again, all recent laws. So this is probably why some of this stuff might be new to some of you. The person's data who's protected is a natural person in the EU, a person who's in California is a person who is a California resident. The same is with Virginia and Colorado. They have to be a resident. Right. But again, it's the internet. You can't stop your site from entering. Well, I guess technically you could stop your site from entering those territories, but you wouldn't want to. All right. Definitely not California. That's a big chunk of money. So what types of data are protected, right? So I'm not going to go over through all these different pieces, but basically anything that affects people's privacy. That's what you want to know. Personal information, personal data, PII. So you just want to be aware of anything that helps identify people and how are you handling that. Make a decision about what your rules are, what your policies are. Definitions. Definition excludes publicly available info. With GDPR, if you have information because somebody posted it on the internet, like they posted their email on their Facebook page and you email them from the Facebook page, GDPR says that you still have to have them opt in. You still have to say, hey, I would like you to opt into my thing. You just can't start sending them information. With CCPA and the rest of them, you don't have to ask for their permission if they publish the information publicly or if it's publicly available. Definition excludes aggregate info. So that means that if there's like information that's used for statistical purposes or surveys or whatever, GDPR, you still, they're saying, yes, you still have to ask. With the rest of them, with CCPA, you don't have to ask when it's in aggregate form, and the Colorado and Virginia is not specified. So general rule is, what we say is do the worst case scenario, right, as your best practice versus trying to do like cater to each one individually. Make sure you just just use the European law as a guide. That's like the worst one. It's the hardest one to comply with. Just comply with that one. And then it'll cover all the rest of them. Now, there are a lot of other pieces of data, right? And there's some samples in here. So biometric data, citizenship, political opinions, genetic data, geolocation, sexual orientation, union membership, marital status, mental health, right? So all these different things that you will probably run into on any given public platform, you want to make sure and cover those in your exploration. B2B related data, COPA is the Online Child Protection Act. There's all these different definitions. HIPAA, everybody knows, for healthcare. So you want to know whether, if you're storing that stuff, you want to know how to handle it properly, right? And then there are different thresholds, right? So thresholds just mean who has to do this, right? So with GDPR, none means everybody. Everybody has to be in compliance. If you do business with anybody in Europe, you must comply. Don't care where you are. CCPA and CPRA. CCPA, you have to have gross revenues of greater than 25 million, or processing data of 50,000 or more consumers, including social media, right? So if you have 50,000 total on your social media, you have to comply, right? However that forms together, if you're an influencer or whatever, you have to mine the data, right? 50% of your revenue comes from selling data, then you have to comply as well. With CPRA, 100,000 or more consumers and 50% of your data, right? 100,000 or more consumers for Virginia, 25,000 or more consumers with at least 50% of your revenue from the sale of data. Same with Colorado, right? So basically, you're wanting to comply with this now if you're small because of GDPR, right? And then we're also going to talk about FTC rules, because FTC trumps all of this, right? And that's the US Federal Trade Commission. You have to comply with these rules for the Federal Trade Commission, regardless of these laws, even though, yes, it doesn't always get enforced well, you could always get busted. And when you get busted, it's all bad, right? So that's not including FTC. So we'll talk about FTC. So who's exempt? Nonprofits are exempt sometimes, unless you're doing commercial activity. If you're doing commercial activity, but you're a nonprofit, you still have to comply because you have consumers. Now, if you're a nonprofit just soliciting donations and it's only about donations, you're fine. But if it's about anything else, if you're selling tickets, if you're have a shop, if you are doing any commercial activity, it still applies. HIPAA, higher education institutions, sometimes specifically in Virginia, higher education institutions are highlighted. Processing data, selling, any dark patterns, right? Meaning where you are managing information in the background. Targeted advertising, if you use Facebook ads, okay, so keep that in mind. That will put you over the threshold. If you are managing data and you're getting back more than 20,000 or 50,000, more than 25,000 or some, or whatever, you're engaging in that commerce and that personal information business, you want to be aware targeted advertising is covered. Profiling, if you're tracking profiles for any reason on your groups, on yours, again, social media is a big area. You want to be aware of like how you're managing that information. You have to give notice to clients about if something bad happens. You have to provide them access. You have to correct, option in, option out, blah, blah, blah. To erasure, same thing, right? So you can take a look at this chart also. Different obligations are imposed on businesses. So you have to be transparent. You have to specify the purpose. You have to minimize data collection. So only do what is necessary, except in California, that's not necessarily true. Secure consent if there are minors or if there's sensitive data. You have to conduct assessments, right? Keep records. Number one thing with everything, keep records, right? Back up those records, get the virus protection, get the different things done, right? When you have breaches, you have to notify everyone in Europe, but you don't have to notify everybody in the other states, but best practices, notify everybody. Just do it. Who may enforce, right? So there's different enforcement entities, mostly the attorney generals. Like I said, with the federal government, it's the FTC. Is there an opportunity to cure, which means like, can you fix it if you mess up? Some places, yes. Europe is no. So if they bust you, that's it. That's the end. And there are different consequences for non-compliance, right? So different fines and things like that. Generally speaking, the FTC, if they bust you, that's it. There's no opportunity to cure. You're just busted and it's bad. So there are other laws you need to know that you want to keep track of, you want to be aware of, right? And then there are 16 states that have portals to privacy policies, procedures, or how to incorporate machine readable privacy policies into their websites, or how to incorporate machine readable policies that are in their websites. So what that means is there's things to check out, right, in your state, in all the rest of the states. Put somebody in charge of like figuring out what your private policy should be. They'll just download a random template. And then in terms of security, you want to make sure you have an incident response plan. This is from the Cyber Readiness Institute. It is free. So if you want to learn like what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be doing it, check out the Cyber Readiness Institute. And then there is a cyber readiness program, very easy for you to understand what you should be doing just in case something happens, right? Bad things only happen to those who are not prepared, right? So make prepared, be ready, right, with your cyber readiness. And there are, let's see, I'm not going to go play this video because I know we're already running a little bit down on time. But there is a trailer in here. Once you get access to this presentation, you can check it out. And then there's some other information about cyber readiness with GM. You can check out that video. I'm not going to play that right now. And that's it for the information. And so Data 360 does have a legal services package you can purchase that cures all of this quickly. You don't have to do anything except for give us your information and we give you all the policies. We give you your access policies, your privacy policies, your terms of use, terms of service. They're made by lawyers. They're also made with software and they're automated, so you don't spend a ton of money, only $149 per month. And you can also check it out with your lawyer and save a bunch of dough from having the lawyer draft things. So definitely hit us up if you need any help in this area, or you want to expand your business greatly and you want to know how to do it properly. We're happy to help. And then we also have a open office Fridays where you can ask questions or talk about your technology woes or anything you want to learn. I will also put that link in the chat. Feel free to sign for those. That's free. And thank you so much. I'm ready to take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marie. So many amazing tools you shared. And I personally love the visual kind of graph, layout. It like really makes it so easy to understand what the differences are between these laws with all the acronyms. And it's like, it gets complicated. So thank you for laying it out that way. We already have a bunch of questions coming in the Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question, please make sure to submit it in that Q&A box. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So let's jump right in. We have someone asking kind of about like third-party service providers, like contractors. So kind of how do you go about making sure that you adhere to consumer privacy laws when you're working with those kinds of services?
You have to have what's called a data processing agreement. So in addition to their independent contractor agreement, you usually have a data processing agreement, which tells them what they have to do to make sure that they're handling data securely. When we do work with our contractors, we have a provider. So the provider onboards our contractors with their contracts. All the legal is included with that provider, and they have a data processing agreement that they can add onto there in addition to their 1099s and all that other stuff that needs to happen. So, and they do it across every country in the world.
Okay.
So definitely, like I said, hit us up if you need, providers or help in terms of figuring out all this stuff, because there are easy ways to stay compliant, but like if you're not aware, you can just get into really deep doo-doo.
Totally. Totally. And like, like you're making these strategic decisions and like, you don't want that to undermine it.
Yeah,
So
you just want to focus on your product and service, but you definitely want to have somebody minding the till, right? And just sort of
yeah.
making sure like you don't hit some weird
Mhm.
pothole of like legal stuff that you don't even know you're supposed to be doing because nobody tells you.
Mhm.
Because for some reason that's the way it is. I'm really passionate about telling people. That's why I do these webinars.
Yeah.
Because it's insane.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions coming in about, like products or like online services that help keep track of your business's compliance. So somebody brought up termly.io. Somebody is also wondering, if there's any integration with Shopify. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, so there's different ones. And the thing about most of these is you have to have an expert. Thank you for the PQ, province of Quebec. I saw, okay, great. Um, with the different groups like Cyber Readiness Institute, Termly, those kind of things. The biggest thing is it's hard to do a DIY.
Mhm.
Right. It's just you need a service provider. I'm not saying that just because we're a service provider. I'm saying that
Sure.
because we have service providers that help us.
Yeah.
Right. And so we pass that information on to our clients, at a low rate so
Mhm.
that it's super easy to get to the point where, so the information becomes more commoditized. But right now, you have three options. You have hire a lawyer, bad, too much money, right?
Right.
Do it yourself, not know what the heck you're supposed to be looking at,
Right.
right? Or hire a service provider that deals with it every day,
Mhm.
right? And the third option is the best, right?
Yeah.
Because, and then, of course, like we have clients who take their agreements after they get them from us or they get them from one of our partners and say, okay, I'm gonna have my lawyer check it. That's
Mhm.
totally fine because that's cheaper, right? You don't want
Right.
to have the
Of
lawyer
course.
drafting everything, especially if they're like old and they don't have a data practice and they don't
Yeah.
have, these laws are, some of them are a few months old, right? And if
Right.
they're not specialists, they're doing
Mhm.
the same thing you're doing. They're looking it up
Totally.
and but they're charging you for it, right? So like,
Yeah.
every time I say, oh yeah, I'll check my lawyer, I'm like, oh, you're going down this
Right.
path.
Right.
Right, just take responsibility for it is the biggest thing, right?
Mhm.
And when
Yeah.
you get in trouble and you say I gave it to my lawyer, they don't care. They're
Mhm.
still gonna fine you. So you might as well learn it. You might as well learn it. Get a
Right.
service provider. Yeah, have a lawyer check it, but like get at least on a basic level, learn it. Right.
Mhm. And then just a quick follow-up question to that. Like in making that decision of going with that third-party service provider, like, and when there are so many options out there, like, how do you kind of go about figuring out what's right for your business?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you have to know how your business operates and it needs to operate every day in respect to its customers.
Mhm.
Right. So if you have to have all of their personal details, like their address for shipping, their um, different um, pieces of information, right? Like, so maybe you follow via social media, maybe you invite them to a Facebook group, maybe you just do like a lot of everything.
Mhm.
The biggest thing is, all this whole subject has certain principles in mind. That's why I was pointing them out earlier in the presentation.
Right.
You just have to know those basic rules, right? Which
Mhm.
is, right to erasure, right to disclosure, right to opt out. All those are, as long as you know those principles, those apply to every business doing business online. They're not specialized to certain kinds of businesses and not others,
Mhm.
right? If you're collecting information online in any way, you have to have that happen, right? You have to have those basic principles, follow those basic principles, do the worst case scenario. Don't do the minimum. If you do the minimum and you try to, game the system, you're gonna get burned.
Totally. It's like kind of like making a long-term investment in a way in your
Yes, it's just
business.
like you gotta have a website, you gotta have legal compliance.
Right.
right? And so many people skip in, they're ready to get, then it's like, oh, you're ready to get busted. Okay, that's a way to handle it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a real possibility, and you always hope it won't happen, but it will happen if, you're not compliant. So it's important. Awesome. Okay, so you mentioned a bunch of different like of the most common laws to be aware of. And so somebody is asking, like, how do you kind of figure out which ones are relevant to your business? Is it like, do you have to already be doing business in these places, or is it more about like the potential of doing business in these places?
Yeah, well, the good news about the internet is it's awesome. You can make a lot of money. And the bad news about the internet is it touches everywhere, except for certain places, right?
Mhm.
So obviously, there's a different internet in like Russia, Iran, China, certain places, but there's not a different internet in the different states.
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
So if you're selling to, if you are selling to those states and you're not actively blocking them, right? You don't have some kind of software that blocks that state.
Right.
You need to be in compliance
Yeah.
with
Mm-hmm.
all the states. So if you say, I want to sell to all 50 states, right? You don't want to hyper monitor. Am I selling to Hawaii? Am I selling to Virginia? Am I selling to Colorado? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with countries, right? And this is kind of, the warning shot is, hey, countries are coming out with these laws too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you have somebody coming from Australia, right? Australia's got some gnarly new laws coming out. If you know
Mm-hmm.
you have people opting in from Australia, you start to notice a pattern. Get in compliance quick, right? Or India, or
Mm-hmm.
right. Some things are blocked, right? And that's the part we're not used to, right? As internet entrepreneurs, which is everybody now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
um, you have to be aware that we're in this borderless society in a lot of ways. And so we just have to be aware, but definitely in the United States, be at the very least be aware of that. And I also promised to talk about the FTC. There is, I will put a follow-up link that you all can send out to everybody that basically talks about the right to disclosure, right, with the
Mm-hmm.
FTC. And so you have to disclose things a certain way, which is the same as legal compliance, it's just framed a slightly different way.
Okay. Awesome.
And so, again, if you get busted, so like, for example, the FTC recently was busting like Kim Kardashian for not saying she's has ads on her social media.
Okay. Yeah.
The FTC is the organization that's finding Kim Kardashian.
Gotcha.
Right. Great example.
Oh yeah.
uh, yeah, or all the celebrities that did the FTX scam.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. Like they're all under heat for the both the SEC and the FTC.
Right.
Right. And then if you're doing securities or crypto or anything with monetary transactions, the SEC is also usually involved. There's usually some disclosure you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people don't, they just think they can just throw an idea out there. Be careful.
Right. Absolutely. We have a couple questions asking about like the use of like personal emails. So, could you maybe like go through a couple like common scenarios, like, of like scenarios in which people might encounter or find someone's email, and like how to kind of determine how they can best use that email?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It's kind of like the wild, wild west with data right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you can definitely find people's emails, their personal and their professional email. All of it applies. It's all considered personal identifiable information, even if it's a business email.
Mm-hmm.
And so you basically just, the gold standard is just ask their permission. I would like to invite you to this. And if they are not interested, they will immediately say, please don't add me to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they'll opt out, or they'll use your system to opt out, or they'll reply and say, please take me out.
Mm-hmm.
If I mean, it doesn't always happen. Like the biggest thing is, the second thing I would say, make sure you have context when you email people. Don't just, I have tons of people every day. I always joke with this with our team and our groups and our mastermind. Hello, you are CIO of a IT company. Would
Right,
you like to check out our software? And I'm just all like, who are you?
right,
What's happening?
right,
Why did you, and it's like, and 90% of it doesn't apply to my job,
right.
right? They're just saying CIO software. Right.
Mhm.
And it's because they don't have a sales strategy. So first I'm like, okay, great. I can sell them our sales program. The second thing I can say, the second
Totally.
thing I just say is, hey, you have, the gold standard is be contextual. Make
Yeah,
sure what you're asking people to do when you get their email is relevant to their lives.
yeah.
And if you don't know that it's relevant to their lives, I hate to say, probably shouldn't email them
Hmm.
until you find out for sure
Yeah,
that you're relevant to their lives. And so that's something we do at Data 360. We have an AI ML system that can tell you that. Or is your email relevant to this person? These are people you should email, these people you should not email.
right.
If you don't have a fancy system like we have, or you're not one of our clients, then you want to get to know people and develop relationships with them either via social media or via live events in IRL, as people like to say.
Mhm.
Get to know people before you email them. Even if you have their information, get to know them. So just target them and start getting to know them, like for real,
Mhm.
right? It's going to be better. You're going to get better results.
Love it. No, that's awesome. And it's kind of like a simple list that entrepreneurs can kind of go through as they're asking themselves, how to properly use that information that they're gathering. So we have a couple of clarifying questions about a couple of the things that you mentioned throughout like your main presentation. So can you talk more about like the Google and the Microsoft data security? Um,
Sure.
and yeah, just kind of how those can be used.
Yeah. And I'll preface it with we are Google Microsoft partners. That's not why we're saying this. We're saying this is because it's a cheap way. Not cheap. Is it cheap is a good word? I guess so.
Affordable,
Okay.
yeah.
Affordable, right? Okay. They are affordable ways where you can handle all these complex issues,
Mhm.
right? And not have to worry about it with like versus like some of the more old school issues. So let me share my screen really quick
Yeah.
just so y'all can see. Um, with Google in particular, Microsoft has a similar panel.
Mhm.
When you log in, so say you go to google.com, you log into your account, right? There's this little dot matrix thing here, and you have what's called the account manager here.
Mhm.
That account manager is where all of your data security and privacy is. Most people don't know it's there.
Right, yeah. I don't know if I've ever noticed it.
Right? And you'll see here it has manage your data and privacy, your account is protected, right? It'll tell you whether there's some recommended actions. It's constantly monitoring what's happening. And then you can see if there's privacy suggestions. So like with ours, it says, okay, there's some privacy suggestions. And it says for us to set up auto delete.
Mhm.
Right. So delete your YouTube history, delete your, right. Those are your suggestions, right? I don't want to do
Yeah,
that right now, but those are two suggestions that they have. And
yeah,
then
that's
every box, right? So you want to make a practice if you have Google Workspace. If you don't have Google Workspace and you think this is awesome, hit us up. We have a code and we can give you a discount.
okay.
But there's a privacy and personalization piece. And so you should just be checking this stuff like all the time, right?
Yeah,
And it has everything. It tells you everything. Your payment methods, it tells you all the apps you have. You
yeah,
can,
wow. Oh, looks like we're frozen. Wait, we'll get Marie back in a moment. All right. Let's see. See if we can get Marie back. All right, she's gonna hop back on. All right, we still got a few minutes, so we're gonna try to get back to these questions. But Marie should be back on in just a moment. If anyone has any final questions, please make sure to submit them in the Q&A box. And yeah, we'll start sharing out some of those links that Marie was talking about. And yeah, let's see if Marie can jump back on. Might be having some internet issues. All right. All right, I think Marie's having some trouble getting back in. Give it another couple moments, see if she can hop back on. Thank you all for your patience. Hoping Marie.
You gotta love when that happens.
Yay, Marie, you're back.
I was like, what just happened? The internet just literally stopped on me.
It's, part of the fun of this work from home environment we're all experiencing nowadays. So no worries.
Yeah, so anyway, so you guys got the gist of the panel. So you can check that out if you have Google Workspace. And like I said, if you don't, you can hit us up at support@data360.solutions and we can definitely hook you up with some cool stuff.
Awesome. Amazing. Okay, so if let's see what we have, if there's any other questions coming in. Okay. So we actually have someone asking about Zoom. So, Zoom is one of the most used video conferencing platforms. Are there, how might we go about ensuring that the conference is secure as we're kind of adopting some of us this new technology still?
Yeah, so every provider you have that is not Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, SAP, IBM, those kind of major tech companies.
Yeah.
They're smaller companies. There really could be an issue around you having to do the work to make sure everything's secure.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you have to do is actually investigate what they do and don't have, right? In terms of like notifying them. And then have they had breaches? Have they had any issues in the past? They might have had things that have happened that you don't know because they weren't public, they weren't in the news, or they weren't, major on the internet, but they happened and it's important that you know that it has happened. Or things that they don't cover. Of course, they're not going to reveal that to you. That's a risk to them, right? They don't want to lose customers. The same with Zoom, right? Zoom is a smaller company in terms of tech. And you have to just be aware, right, of whether Zoom is secure or not for your needs, right? And so if you're inviting people to Zoom, keep in mind, you're also sharing data with Zoom.
Right.
Aha, that's why it's free.
Right, yeah.
Right.
You ask yourself that question, that's why.
Yeah, and so when it's free, they're gathering data on you and on your people, right? What's happening with that data? And if you don't know the answer to that question, you're at risk.
Absolutely.
Right. And you don't have coverage for that, right? On your, you as a participant don't have notices on your website on how you deal with third-party applications. And you don't have an idea of what third-party applications are supposed to do for you and don't do for you. If you don't know, you're just like running blind. That's all bad.
Yeah.
So the trick is like, just don't run blind. Like you really have to like read, take time and read the terms of the applications that you're doing. And take time to read whether this, these scenarios that you're asking for that software to do are really covering you, right? On those basic principles that I outlined. If they don't have those things or they're not clear, right? Or at least at the very least, have it so that, we use Zoom. And if you use Zoom with us, here's how you opt out. Here's where the security policies are. Here's the things you need to know, my person who I'm making you use Zoom with me.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And nobody does stuff and they just wait for the bad things to happen. So the point
is
just don't happen.
Goes back to that kind of core philosophy you were saying at the beginning of being proactive in everything under this umbrella. So that's awesome. I think we have time for one more question. I wanted to touch quickly on the e-privacy regulation in the EU. And if you just like briefly touch on like how, differences, similarities in the other common regulations that you discussed.
Yeah, so with e-privacy in the EU, okay, so the EU has the strictest laws in the world around privacy. And the thing you have to know about the EU is really in the end, the bottom line of the EU is just asking permission, right? And giving transparency. So transparency means disclosure. So that's the same as the FTC laws. You want to disclose exactly what you're doing with the data, why you're collecting it, what's important about it, and how to get out of your system if they want to get out. There are those principles you have to do with the EU that we talked about with GDPR, but it doesn't have to be super complicated, right? Some people have like software to manage the stuff. Some people have, pretty gnarly agreements and all that stuff. It's also process, right? It's also like, hey, you can email us and we'll take care of you. But you have to know, you just have to know internally how to take care of these different requests. Right. And then be able to say to them, this is how I'm taking care of you. If you have any other questions, please let me know.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Okay, so if you just had one last piece of advice, key takeaway from this discussion, what would that be that you'd want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is do your homework.
Yeah.
Right. If it comes down to, hey, I have literally put together these different softwares and I want to know how things should be. Right. Then, start reading the agreements. Right. Start reading the agreements. Start looking at, how you could be most effective with those agreements, right? What's missing, right? And it's like everything. You have to actually take the time, right, to be diligent with everything you're doing in your business, right? You have to know the implication, you have to know the risk, right? Nobody's going to do it for you. And like I said, don't wait till things get bad.
Totally.
Or don't
Amazing.
wait till, we had a client, he made it like $4 million, right? Everybody's like, yay, $4 million, but not yay. And let me tell you why. The reason is because when he went to get more money from the bank, he didn't have the right back office in place.
Mm,
So no one would give him funding because he never did the homework that he was supposed to do to get the next round of funding.
right.
Right. So don't wait until it's insane. Right. And that's
Yeah.
insane.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that's it's a powerful example, honestly. It like shows you how far it can get before you realize, oh, I could have been doing this or I could have been doing that. So that's
Mhm.
super important. Awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's terrible.
Right. Like we don't need it to get to that point, let's try and stay proactive, like you were saying. Marie, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing these incredible insights on such a critical topic. And on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, we are sincerely grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting me. Happy to share.
Awesome. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view by using the link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us again today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us again soon.